Would you take your Bibles with me this morning and turn in them to the book of Leviticus? That's on page 81 if you're using one of the pew Bibles. And if you would, please stand with me. For this morning's reading, I'll be reading the entirety of chapter 1 from Leviticus. Please follow along as I read. The Lord called Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when any one of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of livestock from the herd or from the flock. If his offspring is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall offer a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, that he may be accepted before the Lord. He shall lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him. Then he shall kill the bull before the Lord, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall bring the blood and throw the blood against the sides of the altar that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then he shall flay the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. And the sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. And Aaron's sons the priest shall arrange the pieces, the head and the fat, on the wood that is on the fire on the altar. But its entrails and its legs he shall wash with water. And the priest shall burn all of it on the altar as a burnt offering, a food offering, with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If his gift for a burnt offering is from the flock, from the sheep or goats, he shall bring a male without blemish, and he shall kill it on the north side of the altar before the Lord. And Aaron's sons, the priest, shall throw its blood against the sides of the altar, and he shall cut it into pieces with its head and its fat, and the priest shall arrange them on the wood that is on the fire on the altar. But the entrails and the legs he shall wash with water, and the priest shall offer all of it and burn it on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If his offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or pigeons. And the priest shall bring it to the altar and wring off its head and burn it on the altar. Its blood shall be drained out on the side of the altar. He shall be removed its crop with its contents and cast it beside the altar on the east side in the place for ashes. He shall tear it open by its wings and shall not sever it completely. And the priest shall burn it on the altar on the wood that is on the fire. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word. You can be seated. I want to begin as we get into the deep text of Leviticus to say that every single one of us in this room has rituals. The way I made my coffee this morning was a ritual. I make it a certain way every day. The way you got dressed this morning is a ritual. You don't want anybody watching that ritual, but it tends to happen in the same way. You go through the same steps, even to the point of just start considering which leg you put first in the pants, and then try to switch it the next day, okay? And you almost trip, because we have a ritual. We have a way. Look, we've got hot and cold. We've got every option. If someone could just bring some food up here, we could make an afternoon of it. Thank you, Alex. And so everybody has a ritual way of doing things. We learn by ritual. The way I brush our younger kids' teeth, I'm teaching them a ritual way of brushing their teeth in order to keep up that ritual beyond their young age. So we're constantly going through rituals. We learn by ritual and we participate in ritual. So when it comes to the Bible and it comes to the rituals of Leviticus, we have to understand that God understands we are ritual people. And so we learn by ritual. And ritual is infused with greater or lesser meaning. So I'm talking about brushing teeth. That primarily has only to do with not getting cavities and keeping your teeth relatively white, right? And so we do that, and that's as far as brushing our teeth goes. But then there are deeper rituals that are more symbolic, more fueled with metaphor, such as a wedding. And that is something that we all participate in, or most of us, whether we're actually in the wedding ourselves, getting married, or just observing a wedding. But what we see is symbolically rich. It's metaphor rich. So you have a dad walking his daughter down the aisle as the groom waits. And this is symbolic of the fact that he is the first man in her life, right? It's very rich. It's emotional. This short stretch of a walk symbolizes 18, 20, 24, 30, 34, 40 years. Donna Messenger will be here next week and speaking during our combined Sunday class, and I'm not sure how old she was. I'm not sure she'd want me to know how old she was when she got married, but up 60s maybe. And so you have this, but then at the end of the wedding, who walks out? The groom and the bride. They have become one flesh, and we symbolize that with a kiss. At that point, the two bodies join together in one flesh, and they leave together. And so this is just metaphor. It's ritual. We all do it relatively the same, but it's fused with metaphor. That's the idea. And so Leviticus is very much like that. It's a ritual that's infused with symbol and metaphor, all right? Which is very hard for us because we're not this type of people. About the closest we get to it is a wedding. But we've got to do more. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to give just a brief outline of where we're headed. This is my crafty way of having 1 point be 3 points. You see that? It's like 5 points total, whatever. What am I doing something here that's weird? Not sure. I'm going to see if I'm fully plugged in. Okay, well, hopefully, we'll see. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 background essentials. As we enter into Leviticus, you have to understand these 3 background essentials. Otherwise, the book will not make sense to you. And so this is very, very important. And by the way, I've been reached out to. You guys are reading Leviticus. You're asking what we're going to be preaching on next week. And so all of these things are really helpful. Somebody told me they listened to last week's sermon twice to get it. Listen, this is so good. It will be worth whatever you put into it. It will pay you dividends. Whatever you put into this study, it will richly bless you. So keep it up. That's really great. All right, 3 background essentials that you have to get, and then we're going to talk about the burnt offering is in Hebrew the olah offering, which essentially means to offer up. So in some translations, it might have instead of burnt offering, ascension offering, which is really a better title of this offering than burnt offering. Everybody say ascension. All right, it's real important you get that. And then our olah in Christ, okay? So first, 3 background essentials. The first thing you need to get when you start the book of Leviticus is that you and I are exiles. I want you to feel that in your bones. However at home you feel in this church, however at home you feel in your car, however at home you feel in your home or with your people, I am in exile. That is the most important designation that you understand about yourself. Don't feel at home on this earth. You're in exile. You have to understand that if you're getting into Leviticus, okay? Adam and Eve, when they were removed from the Garden of Eden, the way that's described is that they were driven from the Garden of Eden. You know what driven looks like? It doesn't mean, hey, we'll see. It doesn't mean how your friends leave your house. It means how, like, termites leave your house. You drive them out. Or, we had a pit bull run in our house one time with a bunch of kids in our house, just random pit bull. And, man, getting that thing out of the house was of top priority, all right? Driven out of the house, okay? Excuse me. It's the word that's used for when people are approaching a well and other shepherds don't want them to get to the well, so they drive them away. Listen, when it's time to go to the well, guess what? You really want to get water, right? And if someone drives you away, it's not peaceful. It's forceful. Get out of here. And they do whatever they got to do physically to get you away from something. That's what God had to do with Adam and Eve. Just feel that. This is heels being like this, pushed out of the garden, okay? So that's the first thing to consider. Then second, you say, okay, well, where did they go when they got out of the garden? That's a good question that you're meant to ask. And the answer is, they lived outside of the garden like living in your front yard if the garden were your house. That's how they lived. How can we know that for sure? Well, we know that Cain and Abel brought their offerings to the Lord, which is presumably to his front doorstep, which is in Eden, okay? But it's not just that. After Cain kills Abel, it says that God drove him, so he's removed from the presence of the Lord, so he was with the presence of the Lord, and once God sends him away to wander, he's away from the presence of the Lord, and then it tells you that he went east of Eden. So when Cain moves, he's moving from the doorstep of Eden. That's where they were. That's where they brought their offerings before the Lord. And he goes from his presence and he goes further away. So we know that they were hanging out. And then Paul refers to our bodies as tents. What comes to your mind when you think of tent? You don't think of home. You think of wandering. You think you're away from home. You have an established home. You want to get home. So this is the way we have to understand it. We have to understand that all of the things you and I chase are really counterfeits for home. All of the stuff we chase to make us happy, whatever that is, deep friendship, marriage, sexual pleasure, food, comfort among friends, a good job, the next trip we're going to take, the next vacation we have, anything that you're just like, it's the apple kind of being dangled before you. If I can just get through this, and all of that stuff, it's counterfeit for home. It's masking itself as your deepest desire, my deepest desire, which is to be at home with the presence of God. That's what you're really after. You think you're after all these other things, but you're really not. You're really after satisfaction in the presence of God. And His presence moves anywhere. The tabernacle moves everywhere. It picks up and moves, right? That's what you're about. That's what I'm about. We think we're about X, Y, and Z, but we're really not. Let me tell you a story. And this is like a little bit without Becky's permission and then a little bit with Becky's permission because she has told it publicly before. So I didn't get a chance to talk to her this morning, but I think she's going to be okay. Is she here right now? Nursery. Perfect! Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so for mine and Becky's entirety of our relationship, Becky has had a like surreal fascination with mints. Okay, that sounds weird. Like ever since I've ever known her, she's had mints with her all the time. And they're like a big deal. Like if we go on vacation, she stocks up on a certain kind of mint to go on vacation, okay? If I would ask her for a mint, this is the part I was a little nervous about, but she's not here, so it's perfect. So it would be like asking Gollum to try on the ring. If you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, okay? He's never going to let you try on the ring, okay? Never. All right. She would say to me, if I ask her for a mint, we're going to a party, my breath stinks, hey, can I have a mint? She would squint her eyes at me, and she'd be like, do you really need one? Like, I know it's hard to imagine Becky being this way because she's so nice to you, but that's how she would be with me about these mints, okay? And she went from different brands. She used to start with Starlight mints, and then she went to non-sugar mints and whatever. She'd always have a mint with her, always. Frequently one in her mouth, okay? And after having 6 kids, she learned something about herself, that she was extremely iron deficient. She was anemic, to the point of at one point almost needing a blood transfusion. It was so bad. Her numbers were so low. And so since all the process of having kids, the doctor's like, we got to start having you on a regular appointment with iron infusions to help you. And so check this out. People who are very low on iron have an oral fixation, they've learned over time, that frequently they'll chew on ice. That's a frequent one. But more than anything, they just want to be chewing on something. It's just something weird with your body. A doctor could tell you probably more about it. But it does something to you that makes you want to be chewing on something all the time, okay? When Becky got her first iron infusion, guess what? I have hardly ever seen her with a mint since, because she gets regular infusions now, okay? Never. Like, she had these packs of mints that all went hard in our house. Like, they got stale. Mints get stale, you know. They go bad after a period of time. She never has a mint. Never. She's not interested, ever. Completely overnight. There's no one more baffled about it than her, because she remembers what she was like. I remember what she was like, but she remembers the fix that she had, that she needed these mints, okay? All right, why do I tell you this about Becky? Because here's what I'm saying. You and I are absolutely identical to that, okay? In this way. You think you want what you want right now. You think you want a mint, so to speak, whatever your mint is. It's whatever you're probably thinking about right now. I really hope this happens this week, you know, whatever that is. You think that's what you want. And it feels like what you want. It felt like what Becky wanted to the point where she would just like, I'd have to pull it from her fingers, you know, when she'd give it to me. But here's the thing. You really want something else. Just like Becky's body really wanted iron. You want home with God. That's what Leviticus is all about. It's about how to come home. That's what it's all about. It may not feel like that's what it is, but that's what it's all about. And the reason it's so important is because it's what you and I really, really want. I quoted Rich Mullins last week out of his song, Here in America, I'm home anywhere if you are where I am. That's the heartbeat of Leviticus. So you have to understand, first and foremost, that you and I are in exile. Leviticus is about coming home. That's what it's about, okay? Second, you have to understand what home is like, all right? Home is to be with God, who is a consuming fire, okay? Now, that's intimidating. You know, no one wants to pass through fire. No one wants that. But the burning bush, if it could talk, could probably tell you a pretty cool story about what it feels like to be within Yahweh's flame and not burned up. If the bush could talk, it would probably tell you it's a really cool experience, being in Yahweh's flame and not being burned up. You know who else could tell you a story like that? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whose clothes didn't even smell like smoke, and not a hair on their head was singed. They could probably tell you a really cool story about what it's like to be in Yahweh's flame and not consumed. And here's the thing. You're like, well, they were in Babylon. That's how Yahweh's flame works. You'll find in Leviticus that you can pass through Yahweh's flame as an animal and do it His way with a substitute, or you can turn your back on God and get passed through Yahweh's flame in another nation. The difference is those nations actually burn you. Metaphorically, they whip you and beat you. And so this is the kind of thing. You can be trained by Yahweh, His way, or you can be trained by the vice that you're currently nursing and be trained its way. You know? Is it pleasant? Is it more pleasant to be trained by Yahweh or trained by your vice turning its back on you? You know? Like if your vice is spending money, you will learn Yahweh's flame through a thing called debt. And you'll hate that flame. But it's a flame. It will burn you. It will consume you. It will refine you. But man, Yahweh's flame, learning how to handle your finances Yahweh's way, as hard as it is to say no to yourself on certain things, as tough as that is, His flame is way more gracious than debt. Right? So you choose your flame. That's the idea. But God is a consuming fire, and He will either burn you His way and refine you, or He'll turn you over to the flames of that which you seek, and He'll refine you that way, which is way more costly and way more painful in a sense. But Yahweh's a flame. Where do we see this? Well, there's so many I had to use a completely separate slide. 3 times at least in the Bible, God is referred to as a consuming fire, which means He is a fire that eats. He eats you. He's a consuming fire. Where do we see God as a flame? Well, in day 1, God's glory light shines, and what is His glory light replaced with? The flaming sun, the flaming stars, and the moon that reflects the flaming sun. So day 1, His glory is like a flame, because He says, this is what my glory looks like, and He puts the sun, moon, and stars in the sky. So it's a fiery glory. When Adam and Eve leave the garden, He separates them between Himself and them with what? A sword of fire. When He gives His name in Exodus 3, He gives it in a burning bush, so constantly associated is He with fire. The Psalms tell us that His breath is fire. Isaiah says His tongue is fire, that His arm is fire. And I can give you references. I didn't have room on the slide if you'd like them, if you'd like to study this further. When God gets angry, the word that's used for God's anger is His nose burned. That's what the Hebrew says. His nose burned. Okay? Notice, if you're with people who are getting angry, what happens to their nostrils? They flare, right? Flare? Fire goes before Him, Isaiah says. In Exodus, pillar of fire by night is what God is associated with. Sinai, when He takes them to Sinai, what's atop Sinai? Fire, smoke, and gloom. All of these things. And then in the tabernacle, when He moves into the tabernacle, the way you know He's there is they put a sacrifice on the altar, and it says that fire came out of the tabernacle and consumed the sacrifice. Okay? So what you have to understand about God is He is constantly, regularly, from the beginning of the Bible, throughout the Bible, associated with fire. You have to understand that about God. Okay? And fire can be a mesmeric sort of entity or a fearful entity. Burning bush is mesmeric. It's amazing. I'm experiencing what should be hurting me, and I'm unbelievably happy. It's crazy, right? Or it can be the fire that burns up chaff, which is a fearful fire. Okay. All right. So that's the second thing you need to know when you approach Leviticus. And then you need to know that when God's fire, which is an eating fire, a consuming fire, when it ingests something, it transforms it. Okay? Now, I don't want to be gross here, but you remember that this was the first book that Hebrews taught their children. Okay? Let me ask you something, not to be too gross or crass, but let's just be honest, okay? The food that you look at for lunch today, you will see again, won't you? Does it look the same the second time? No. You have transformed it. Your body has transformed it. Okay? Now, do you know that for years and years and years, farmers would use personal manure for their farms? Okay, so here's what I want you to see. That we are like God in the sense that what we consume, we transform. And that transformation, as icky as it might sound, can be used to make something wonderful. Okay? All right. So, here's the thing. When you come to Leviticus, you're tempted to look at sacrifice as an animal dying. And that's it. And then you move on. Oh yeah, Leviticus, it's about how everything dies. Everything gets killed in Leviticus. Wrong understanding of Leviticus. To understand Leviticus rightly, you need to understand that, yes, death is important in the sacrificial system, but that's frequently just a minor point in the overall strategy of the author, which is sacrifice is not mere death, it's transformation. Sacrifice is transformation. That what God takes into his fire, it comes out looking differently. Think of metal, for instance, right? Think of gold or copper or silver found. What does it have? Well, it has elements in it that are not pure silver, pure gold, pure bronze, right? And so what does it do? It goes through a fiery process in which it is refined and made more glorious. All right? So this is how you have to understand that his fiery consumption transforms. Where do we see this? Well, we see it, number one, in creation. How do we see it in creation? Well, we know that God's fire, his glory fire, is shining on day one. Okay? I just want you to see, you got to think outside of the box here for a second, okay? Think about creation in Genesis 1. God's fire shines from heaven. His glory fire shines from heaven. And as a result of that, you should expect the earth to undergo a sacrificial transformation. That's a lot like the sacrifices in Leviticus. And guess what? It starts happening. His glory light shines from heaven, and so the earth starts getting dissected and transformed, divided, right? Water from air, it gets divided. Think of a sacrifice. You cut the animal and you divide it. You start dividing it. The earth starts getting divided. What do you do with the insides of the animal, according to Leviticus 1? You wash it. What's the inside of the earth in Genesis 1? The land. It's covered with water. And what happens? The land comes out of the water. It's been washed. It's been washed. And then once the land comes out of the water, what's the very next thing that comes out? Fire. The sun. Are you with me? So the earth, and then once it goes through the sun coming out, guess what happens? The earth comes alive, as it were, in a new glorious way with birds and fish and land animals and human. It starts moving. It's alive. It's been transformed. The earth itself goes through a sacrificial process, just like Leviticus 1. Okay? But then God continues with Adam. Adam was really the first sacrifice. The word that's used for Adam, when he's put to sleep, is really he's put into a coma. It's like surgery. He's killed in a sense. He's like not there, right? And then he is cut open. He's dismembered. And he becomes more glorious for having gone through God's sacrifice. Because Eve is referred to as Adam's what? His glory. Adam is one flesh with this entity who God calls his glory. So he just became a more glorious being for having went through the ritual of sacrifice. But it keeps going because Eve is referred to, her name in Hebrew that Adam gives her classification, is the exact, if you look in Leviticus 1, it's used 3 times in Leviticus 1. The food offering or food portions, it'll be translated. That is the exact name for Eve in Hebrew. In consonants. Consonants were what the Bible was only originally written in. When you read Isha, it is the exact same word that's used for offering by fire, food offering by fire, which means that Adam was sacrificed to give life to Eve, who is his glory, and then Eve becomes an actual living sacrifice unto God. She is his food portions, as it were. So we are to be living sacrifices unto God, is the idea. Okay? Then you keep going. Israel, think of Israel. How did Israel come into existence? Well, they were sacrificed, were they not? They weren't, though. It was on Passover, the lamb was sacrificed, which illustrated their death. Okay? So blood's put over the doorframe. They died. That's the picture. They just died when that lamb died. All right? And then what do they go through? They get washed. How do they get washed? They pass through the Red Sea, and then they get put on the altar. Where do they get put on the altar? What's Sinai? It's a high stony object with fire on top of it. And their representative, Moses, is at the top in the fire. Okay? So all of these paradigms are a demonstration that when you enter God's fire, you go through a death of sorts and come out more glorious. And Israel became more glorious because they become the house of God themselves in the tabernacle. Okay? So this is a constant movement. And then the earth itself, because of sin, is going through a sacrificial process. All of earth's inhabitants died sacrificially. You take the animal to the altar and they get their throat slit. They die. When did all of earth's inhabitants die at one point? All of them, except for the flood. They all die. So they die, and then the earth is what in the flood? And this is the word that's used for it. I'm not making this up. It's called, I will wipe it clean. I'll wash it. So think of it. Earth it's a sacrificial image. Everything dies. It's washed in the flood. And then you say, okay, well, when's the earth going to get burned in sacrifice? Go to the end of time. And what does it say? That he will come, and the earth will be, what does Peter tell us? Burned with fire. So, what you find is that all of these paradigms are demonstrating a sacrifice through fire, through washing, through fire, and you come out more glorious. That's what all of these paradigms demonstrate. It's how God operates. So, these are the essential backgrounds to understand the book of Leviticus. If you don't have these, Leviticus is like cross your eyes crazy. You don't understand it. You got to understand that you and I are in exile, that our deepest need is to go home. That's our deepest need. All right? And then, what is home? Well, home is to be in Yahweh's flame, but not consumed. And that's why Paul says, look, everything you do is going to get tested by fire. And you have the option of having all that's wood, hay, and stubble burned up, or gold, silver, and fine metals. Like, we're all going to experience a purge. And that's exactly what God's doing with us right now, according to his will, is he is purging you through many different sorts of fire. He is purging you and making you pure. That's what he's up to, because that's what he does. He makes things more glorious. Let me just throw in there as a side note, people even try to counterfeit that, right? Because what did ancient kings do in the Old Testament with their kids? They burned them with fire. That's not from nowhere. But this is the difference between being burned with Yahweh's flame in a gracious way, because he gives you a substitute, or having your own children burn. But that doesn't just come out of a vacuum. It's just somebody trying to do God's work in their stupid way, which we're all capable of doing. You can try to raise your kids according to the Yahweh's flame or according to your own flame, which is according to your manipulative tools. And they will come out a really good image of your faulty image instead of God's. Right? So we all have this option. And then finally, his fiery consumption transforms in a really glorious way. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to detail then just little pieces of the ascension offering, okay? So what you need to see is that with the ascension offering, you essentially re-enter Eden. What kept you out of Eden? Because that's our true home. What kept us out of Eden? A fiery sword is what kept us out of Eden, correct? All right. So to re-enter Eden, you should expect to pass through sword and fire. And guess what? To re-enter God's house, what do you pass through? You get your throat slit, and you pass through fire. That's what happens, okay? Now, the transference is very important. The word for laying on of hands is not just like I'm laying my hand on this. It's like this. It is like, if you're going to slit somebody's throat, something's throat, is it going to want you to do that? You are going to have to first forcefully leverage your weight to slit the beast's throat, okay? And this is very significant because what it's demonstrating is that you are on that animal. You are associated with that animal. And actually, I think there's even a deeper imagery of your forcefulness in sin is what brought this about. Because every time we sin, we force our hand. We make it happen. And I think that's also illustrative of it. But it's re-entering Eden. And the reason it's called an ascension offering is because anytime you go to Eden, you go up. You go up into Eden, okay? And so that's the idea that this animal comes in and it changes substances because it changes from an animal to smoke, which rises up and is smelled by the Lord in his house. Remember, the tabernacle is a horizontal mountain. So to smell something in the holy place is to smell something halfway up the mountain. Okay? So that's the idea. So it's a re-entering Eden. And I think this also gives concept to what happens in Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and fallen short. Sinning is going down. Righteousness brings you up. Who can ascend the hill of the Lord except him who is righteous? And so this is the idea. Adam and Eve, where do they go when they sinned? They'll return to dust, which is down, right? So that's the imagery of up and down. And then we approach as beasts. Why do we approach as beasts? Because it's who we listen to in the garden. You listen to a beast, and then you get dressed as beasts. Before they leave the garden, he clothes them with skins of a beast. And so when you see someone coming up with an animal to sacrifice it, and then leaning on it and saying, this is me, essentially, you're like Adam and Eve. That's why John the Baptist and Elijah wore camel skin. They were a forever remembrance of the world that you sinned and we are exiles and this is not our home. Don't wear fine clothes, you know. This is the idea. Okay, so we approach as beasts, but we're domesticated ones. Now, why? In the law, you'll find later that if you're a hunter, you cannot bring your deer that you bow and arrowed. You can't do that. Why do you think? Why do you think? Why does it have to be domestic? All right? I want you to think of Nathan's rebuke of David when he slept with Bathsheba. He says, I have a story to tell you. There was a rich man that came into town. He had untold amount of herd and cattle and all this sort of stuff. And he comes in, but do you know what this guy did? He went to a man who only had one lamb. And that lamb was precious to that man's children. It was like part of their family. That lamb would eat from his hand, and it was very precious to him. And that king, that rich man, he took that man's lamb and did it, okay? Here's the idea. Why is it domestic? When do you meet the deer? Now, we've got hunters that get to know a deer through trail cameras and stuff, right? You sort of get to know the deer that way. But how do you get to know domestic animals? From the time they're born, right? And you raise them, and you might even name them. And they're like part of your family. So when it comes time to kill it, you are deeply and intimately what? Associated with it. It's like part of you. All right? So that's the concept of domestic. I think there's another thought of that we're also herd people. We're not meant to be lone wolves. We are meant to be together as a body. And so herd animals, they stick together with other animals like themselves. And you'll find in Leviticus, we're often compared to animals. We learn a lot from animals. And so that's another reason. Then you notice that he moves from bull to a sheep or a goat to pigeons or turtle doves. This all has to do with economy, class levels. The rich people could afford a bull. The middle class people, sheep or a goat. And the poor of the poor could bring birds. So all classes are welcome, you notice. These are the things you should notice. Another thing is, you notice where the blood goes, because here's the deal in Leviticus. Where the blood goes, you go. Where blood goes, you're allowed to go. Blood paves the way. I want you to think back. Listen, all of the animals that you'll see through Leviticus, it's not the first time you met them. You met all of these animals in Genesis 15 when God made covenant with Abraham. That's when the Levitical system animals are introduced. He says to Abraham, take a bull, take a goat, a sheep, take turtle doves and pigeons and split them in half, okay? And so it might be a heifer. I can't remember if it's a bull or heifer, but that class of animal. And he splits them all in half, and then he's supposed to walk through them. So let me ask you a question. If you split a bunch of animals in half and put this half over here and this half over here, and then you walk through the middle, what's going to get on your feet? Lots of blood, right? And that is the first moment where God communicates to his people, blood paves the way. So wherever the priest will sprinkle blood, it's where that person gets to go. That's the idea, okay? So blood paves the way. So it's splashed on the side of the altar, and it's always moving from top down. Blood always moves from top down. So God is giving you blood to walk on. That's the idea. God is paving the way with blood so that you can go on it. So you notice the sacrifice is on top of the altar, the blood's underneath it. So you're the sacrifice, remember. Don't forget that. You're the sacrifice. I'm the sacrifice. And the blood's underneath me. Blood paves the way, and it runs down to the ground. The animal goes up. Now, I've said before that the animal goes up in smoke, right? That's true. But it's not just that. If you read Leviticus 1 closely like you should have, you would notice that he delivers how the animal is put on the altar in a certain way. What goes first on the altar? Somebody rebuked me really recently and said, no one ever answers your questions because they don't trust you. And I know that I have fostered and facilitated that, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He goes, even when they answer right, you correct them. And I'm like, you're right. You're right. That's something deeply dysfunctional is going on inside me. I'm trying to figure out what that is. But I forgive you for not answering. I'm a new man up here. I'm being reformed by God's fire. Okay, so the animal goes up. The first thing that goes on the altar, now you got to think symbolically. You're a kid. You're 12 years old. You're not 52 right now, okay? So think symbolically. The first thing that goes on the altar is the head. Then the fat. Okay? Then the entrails. Then the legs. Okay? So here's what I want you to picture. Oh, and it's not just the legs. It's the hind legs. The hind legs. You don't see that in your text, but it specifies the hind legs. Okay? So here's what I want you to picture. I want you to picture Malachi chapter 4. What does it say? Let me see here. Malachi chapter 4. For behold, the day is coming, burning like an oven, when all the arrogant and evildoers will be stubble. That day is coming, shall set them ablaze, says the Lord of hosts, so that it will leave them neither root nor branch. But you, who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings, and you shall go out leaping like calves from the stall. Okay? Here's what I want you to picture. That animal from the altar is leaping off the altar. It moves from head to fat to stomach to hind legs. It is like, boom, into what? Smoke. So this animal who represents you is springing into heaven like a calf from the stalls. And again, most of us, don't raise calves, but I hear that that's quite the sight. Loretta told me she would see that when the calves would leave, I think it was Loretta, that they were just jubilant with excitement when they're freed to go. They're leaping. Where are they leaping? It's head, fat, stomach, hind legs. They're leaping back into Eden, glorified and renewed to enjoy the presence of the Lord. So the animal is transformed. I've shared that with you before, that the animal is made completely brand new to the point where it's turned to smoke, but this smoke now is pleasing to the Lord. It's favorable. It's accepted by the Lord. Whereas God drives Adam and Eve out, this one is welcome in. That's the idea. So we're finally home because God smells it. And where's God? Well, He's in His house. So we're back home now. That's the imagery. And then what's left behind are, it points out, ashes. And the ashes will be brought outside the camp. And this is very important imagery because the rest of the Bible, and this isn't just from Leviticus, it comes back from Genesis 3, where the fiery sword. If Adam and Eve or Cain, we have Oreo, our dog, and we have an invisible fence. And every once in a while, Oreo gets so excited about something, he's like, it's worth it. It's worth it. And he bolts through, and then he keeps going, like it was worth the zap. Okay, if Adam and Eve or Cain and Abel were like, you know what, doggone it, I hate feeling pain. I'm gonna run through the fiery sword, right? What would it have turned them into? Ash. Because God's sword is compared to lightning in other places, okay? And it's fiery, right? So you come to a pile of ash. And that becomes a picture throughout the rest of the Bible of what it looks like to repent, right? You're burned by heaven's sword without being burned by it. When you take ash and you put it on your head. And then you put on sackcloth, which is mourning clothes, like you died, okay? And you sit in the dust, which is what you turn into when you die. So all of this imagery is saying, God, I need total renovation. I need completely burned down. I need to be like a forest fire that's all that's left is ash, and then it regrows exponentially, brand new, quicker than everybody thought it would grow, because it's you doing the growth your way. And that's what I want. I want total destruction of myself. I'm sick of myself. I can't stand the way I act. I'm so sick of the way I've hurt people. I need remade. I need burned down and built back up. And Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. That is the movement of the Old Testament. It's to burn you down into ash. It's hot coals of glory on your head to make you brand new. That's what it's all about. This is the point. The burnt offerings was not the point, and unfortunately that's exactly what Israel did. They just thought the ritual is where it's at. The ritual will do it. And God says, it's never been about the ritual. The ritual was a tutor to help you understand the main point. It's just a tutor. It wasn't the deal. David understood this. Others did. Most of Israel failed to understand it. They thought the glory was in the ritual. And God's like, the ritual is just a helpmate to you. What's the point? I desire steadfast love, not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. I want you back in my house. I don't want you there because it's warm and this. I want you to want me. That's what I'm cultivating in you, is our relationship. That's what you need most. Not what I need, it's what you need most. So don't come in because the food tastes good and because it's warm inside. You want me. That's what you're supposed to want. And then lastly, our Olah in Christ. That Christ, remember, everything we encounter in Leviticus, in some way, shape, or form, is going to glorify Christ. And when we look at Christ, what do we find? Christ was washed, where? In baptism. This is all imagery of sacrifice going on here. He goes through the water, he's slayed, blood running down, and how does he end? By ascension. We watch him go up. And so here's the deal. Just like you enter into the tabernacle temple precincts with that animal, and as you stand back, and watch that animal that you're intimately associated with at this point, it's a domestic animal, it probably has a name, and you watch and participate in the slaying of this animal, and then watch that animal's transformation going up into God's house. When you stand back and consider the ascension of Jesus Christ, after he's been through this sacrifice ritual, you are essentially watching you ascend unto the Lord. That's what you're doing. That's not just Jesus' ascension. Paul will say he led out a group of captives. So he's bringing, when you see Christ ascending, I want you to picture standing in front of an elevator. That maybe is the closest picture we have, right? You're standing in front of this elevator that you didn't prepare. You didn't build that thing. You happen to be a glad recipient so that you don't have to walk 7 flights of stairs, right? And you get in and you just feel the grace of that elevator bring you to where you could otherwise never go, so to speak. That's what it's like to come to Jesus Christ and ascend in Him. In Him. He went through this whole process so that we could ride up with Him to the Father. Amen? Ask musicians to come.